Hi, I'm Jennifer Stein. Welcome to Mainline MUFON here at Radnor Studio 21. I'm your host, and today I have a very unique and wonderful guest for our local lectures that we do here at the Tredyffrin Public Library in Radnor. His name is Ed Nightingale, and Ed is the author of a book called The Giza Template. Ed and I had the pleasure of being co-presenters at a conference called the Paradigm Conference in Minneapolis about 2 years ago. And when I heard Ed's presentation on the Giza Plateau, I was just dumbfounded and so inspired and so moved. I knew that I needed to bring Ed at some point to our local Radnor community and have him present for Mainline MUFON. So if you're just tuning into this program for the first time and you don't know anything about Mainline MUFON, MUFON stands for the Mutual UFO Network. It's an acronym, MUFON, and of course the word UFO is in the middle of mutual and network. So it's MUFO Network, the Mutual UFO Network. It's an international organization with local chapters around the world. We have a chapter here on the main line called Mainline MUFON. And if you go to that website, you can see about the ongoing programs that we have on a regular basis. They're free lectures at the Tredyffrin Public Library. And then we're lucky enough to come here to Radnor Studio 21 and do a more in-depth interview for anyone interested in knowing more about this speaker. So I want to welcome you, Ed, and thank you for coming into the Philadelphia area to come and present. For those of you who may know, Ed traveled to Egypt in 1999 with another famous author named John Anthony West, who brought a lot of attention to Giza and the Great Pyramids there and the Sphinx through research he did with a geologist named Robert Schoch. They were well known for actually producing a highly award-winning documentary called The
Mystery of the Sphinx.
The Mystery of the Sphinx. Thank you. I was blanking on the name of that. And anyone watching can probably Google that now on YouTube and watch it. But it just begins to crack the surface of some of the what I would say, the data that's there in plain sight about these ancient monuments and the significance and importance that they have. So I would highly encourage anyone watching to also Google and learn about John Anthony West and the very famous geologist Robert Schoch and the work they did on the Sphinx. Ed and myself have both traveled with John West, and it's a very powerful trip when you go with John West. You're not getting the typical Egyptological approach to the fact that all these pyramids were built just 2,000 years ago and that, the biblical stories of, the Jews who were enslaved there built all these pyramids. There's probably another story to Giza.
Yes, it's a very deep story, and it goes back, much deeper into antiquity than the academics would like to admit.
So where would you like to jump in, Ed? There's so many questions I can ask you. I think what I should also tell the audience is that Ed has an artist background. He is a professional woodworker and carver and does very elaborate special projects for cathedrals and churches and private contracts where people have hired Ed he and his company and team of people that he has had working for him doing very intricate work. So Ed is really an artist that approaches the whole topic of looking at these structures and the exquisite sacred geometry that's connected to them from an artistic perspective. So I guess maybe what we should first talk about is what is golden mean ratio and Fibonacci sequence for those who have never heard of these patterns in nature and patterns in structure that you uncovered and found there at Giza.
Well, if we start from the beginning, originally my idea that I had for the design of Giza came from just an artistic point of view, looking at it as like a complex instead of individual structures built by individuals and being completely, separate structures. And when I looked at it, the balance of the larger pyramids to the smaller pyramids seemed to indicate to me like a center point of where if an architect was to lay this out, this complex, there would be a common point that they would start with. Mm-hmm. That would be the point of a compass, and they would take all measurement from that point. So when I went over with John, and it was 1997 that I went over, but I had that thought of where this point might be. And when I was there, I actually found a point that was a core bored right in the bedrock of about a 3-inch diameter hole, and that was confirmation for me that I was on the right track. But these proportions that you're talking about, the Fibonacci sequence, for instance, or the phi ratio, which is very, very similar in its proportion, it is found throughout nature. It makes up our whole bodies are made up in divisions of this Fibonacci or phi proportion. And it's a natural way that nature uses. The flow of energy is actually all part of this. How energy will flow, and it takes the path of least resistance, and it's the simplest way things move. And if a Fibonacci series is actually a series of numbers. It goes 1, 1, then 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 5 is 8, 5 plus 8 is 13, 8 and 13 is 21, etc. And it goes through this series of gradually increasing its size by a ratio of about 0.16, or 0.618, I'm sorry. That increases, if you see a spiral, these curves get bigger each time it goes around. And
it's like 1.5 times bigger than the measurement prior to it.
Right.
And actually, if I'm not mistaken, Fibonacci was an Italian botanist from the 15th or 16th century who observed how plants grow naturally in nature. And first they pop up with one stalk out of a seed, and then after that another single leaf appears. Then the next series of leaves to appear is 2. Then the next series of leaves to appear is 5, and the next series of leaves to appear is 8. And it doesn't matter what seed it is, if it's a carrot or a potato or a, or an oak tree or anything. So he recognized this pattern.
Right.
But it's also quite fascinating is that you can look at our spiral galaxy and map this same proportion. So as you said, it's a flow of energy.
Yes.
In nature, it's the way the sun's energy comes to the earth. It's a much more profound energetic process.
Absolutely. And what I'm demonstrating here with my work is also that the Fibonacci series was well known in much more earlier period than the 15th century. And that's one of the things that my work has really displayed. There are different elements in there that were attributed to Plato and different periods of time, which we can now see that whoever created the Giza complex was well aware of all this mathematics and geometry, and this is really the root of sacred geometry. When we talk about sacred geometry and the different shapes and proportions, this is where it all comes from. It's in really nature. It's nature's way of using energy. And
a wonderful example of that for anyone wanting to just Google the shape of a sunflower.
yeah, sunflowers.
They can look right into a sunflower's
Beautiful example.
shape of the seed patterns, and they can see multiple series of arm spirals that come off of a central point. They can find all sorts of sacredness just within that. That's just an excellent, simple example.
Right. And there's so many examples. I mean, like I was saying before, the human body is all proportioned in the phi ratio, and really almost everything incorporates this geometry, and it all again goes back to this flow of energy. And
so going back to Giza, let me ask you this. When you started to look at the plateau, see how it was lined up, you were inspired by the work of Robert Bauval, who made who grew up, he's a Dutch gentleman, Dutch from Belgium. His parents lived in Egypt. I think his father was responsible for underwater systems and piping and urban development there. So Robert grew up living in Egypt, and he began to realize a correlation between the three main pyramids at Giza and the star system of Orion. You were inspired by his work, correct?
Right.
And you started to see a galactic alignment, but not only with those three stars. So let's talk a little bit about the programs you used and what types of alignments you were starting to find from different star systems.
Sure. Okay. Well, again, Robert Bauval, a good friend of mine, and I've been an admirer of his work since the Orion Mystery that he co-authored with Adrian Gilbert, who, by the way, was on the trip with me when I went with John. Adrian Gilbert was along. So I had the co-author of the Orion Mystery there to learn from, and John West. So it was an extraordinary trip, and I had been aware of and read the material, and I was on board with this idea of the three belt stars aligning with Orion. And what I've done with this template that I have drawn to lay out the whole design of Giza is I've been able to take that template and match those belt stars up with Orion and see in the bigger picture of the belt stars just index the template on the star patterns. From there, we can see how these stars are moving. That's one of the main purposes of Giza, is to measure the motions of not only our planet here, but the sun and its motion through space, and where did our sun come from. And that is probably one of the most important aspects of Giza. But there's two celestial markers at Giza, one being Orion with the three belt stars and the three pyramids. The other is the Sphinx, which John did all that work proving and with Robert Schoch that it's much more of an ancient structure than we're led to believe. But that is the marker, or the point at which all the measure of the heavens were taken. In order to map a trajectory like we're talking about, you would want to have one place on the Earth that you measured from, so that all your measurements from that point on were all the same, because you're measuring from the same point. The Sphinx, that's the Sphinx job, to be there to watch the eastern horizon and watch the motions of the heavens. And there were very particular ones that they were looking at. They were looking at Orion, and they were looking at Leo, which is associated with the Sphinx. It's a lion body, the Sphinx, along with its counterpart in the sky is Leo, the constellation Leo, the lion in the sky. And there's a star in Leo, the star Regulus. That was another one that they were watching, and there's a reason for that in its position that's located on the ecliptic, and the ecliptic is just the path of the sun, and the star, as we look at the ecliptic, is on that ecliptic. So they were measuring that motion of how long does our ecliptic take to go around in a complete circle. They were looking at how long it takes our sun to move around and have an alignment with the galactic center, which was a big deal in 2012 when we had this galactic alignment. Well, it's a very precise alignment that aligns the Earth, the sun, and directly behind the sun is the center of the galaxy. This is a logical alignment to mark any kind of calendar off. So that alignment there is probably the most important alignment that happens during the cycle. And it was marked out by not only the Mayans, but I've shown quite clearly it's marked out at Giza and other sites around the world that
probably Stonehenge and probably places like Angkor Wat. And,
yes, absolutely, and we could go on because once this template is understood, I would dare say there's very few monuments on the Earth that do not have this element to it. And the basic idea here was they were mapping the trajectory of our sun and the path of our sun, how our sun is moving and where it was birthed. And in my research, and what is clearly at Giza, is that our sun was birthed in the nebula of Orion, in the M42 Nebula. And there's been some recent new science with some new telescopes going up that have actually supported this. And I'm quite excited to present some of that and show that I think we can show quite clearly that where our sun was birthed and its very specific trajectory being a Fibonacci spiral moving away from that nebula.
So there are certain photographs from NASA that you showed in your presentation where you show this gaseous plasma stream that comes from this nebula. And what is the name of that spiral again?
That's Barnards Loop. If you want to look at that, that's very interesting. You can see clearly what they did to observe that. In really dark skies, you can see a faint spiral. But with time-lapse photography, you can really clearly see this spiral that emanates from M42 and is literally, as it is shown at Giza in this template, this is the path of our sun. And what that it's like a red filament, and it's ionized hydrogen and plasma, which is associated with an electrical field or electromagnetic, and that's exactly how electricity travels in a spiral. It does not flow straight down a wire. It moves in a spiral.
It's like a wave.
Yes, and this is why we see these spirals, and this is what I was talking about with energy flow and how energy decides to move forward. It's quite an amazing
quite
thing.
Profound.
It is.
It really is. So for people who are suddenly lost, which the first time I heard your presentation, I was like, what? What? There are certain programs that people could download or access either through a public library or find on their own that can take the night sky and reverse it or move it forward. And these are programs that both Graham Hancock, John West, and Robert Schoch have used in marking the specific shapes and layouts of other temple complexes around the globe. What is the name of some of those? Is one called Starry Night or?
Yeah, there's Starry Night. I use stellarium, and for no particular reason. I think there's a Redshift, maybe there's one. There's several different star viewing applications are easily, you can put them, they're great now. You can put them on your phone, and you can go out and you can point it at the sky, and it shows all the constellations. It's really some great stuff.
Yes, you can even do it during the daytime or the nighttime.
Right, you don't even need to be
It's
at
literally a GPS positioning program.
Correct.
So you can hold your phone up if you don't know what a star is and look at your phone, and it'll identify the stars you're looking at. It's quite phenomenal.
Yeah, it really enhances the star viewing experience, no doubt. And you can start to then understand how these movements and why were these ancient people so obsessed with watching the sky. And we can explain some of that.
Yes,
And,
I was very moved at not only the first time I saw your presentation, but also in some of Robert Schoch's presentations, and also John West and Robert Bauval, when they showed the alignments of where certain stars come up on the horizon at specific dates, like December 21st, which happens to be a solstice. Yes. It's where the sun's movement stops, stands still before it begins to traject back across the sky. It's of course, the darkest part of the year here in our hemisphere. Opposite on the opposite side of the world, it would be the longest day and the lightest, period of time. Or I should say the longest hours of daylight, and of course on our upper hemisphere, the shortest hours of daylight. Right. So at these specific points where the sun stops, it's a little easier to measure because it's in the same position for 2 days. It has this trajectory where it's moving every morning, it's coming up at a slightly different point, then it stops, then it starts to traject back across the sky. So at these specific points, the stars that are coming up on the horizon, the constellations that rise on the horizon, the first ones you see, are these important alignments that you were discussing. So looking at this program and looking at the trajectory of the complex, the Sphinx and the Giza Plateau behind it, Leo was rising on the horizon specifically at certain dates in the ancient past, almost as if the date marked the important measuring or maybe even the construction date of some of these sites. This was so profound for me to see that if you're standing at the Giza Plateau or you're standing in front of the Sphinx looking straight out, as the Sphinx obviously does, Leo was rising on the horizon. It's almost like the Sphinx was looking at itself, like maybe we reflect on ourselves, or it had a profound statement about consciousness, that consciousness reflects itself, and here the Sphinx is looking at itself rising. It's deep.
Yes, it is.
It takes you.
It is very deep. It really is, and it's so important. And this is why they spent such an inordinate amount of time in construction on these temples, not just in Giza, but all around the world. This, I guess we could talk about the Great Year and these processional movements, if is what really that they were documenting. Now, for those who don't know, what the Great Year is academia will say that the Earth's axis wobbles, and it takes about 25,920 years to make one complete circle. There's a little bit of a problem with the view that academia takes, in that when measuring that wobble, they can clearly measure the wobble if they are using a distant star to measure the movement. They can clearly see that it looks like our Earth is wobbling. The problem lies within the fact that no one to date yet, and I've been challenging anyone who would like to show me this data, there is, despite the ability to be able to measure this wobble against local bodies in our solar system, the sun and any other planets. If we're wobbling, we still should be able to measure that wobble against the different planets and the sun. There shouldn't be any difference between a distant measurement and a close, other than the need for a higher accuracy measuring tool to do that with. But there shouldn't be any discrepancy if it's just
it should be
our
proportional.
Earth.
It should be
Right,
proportional.
exactly.
The stars further away may measure a greater wobble, but the stars closer should measure a smaller proportion of that same wobble.
Right. We should be able to easily see that. But there is no wobble when you're measuring against the sun and the planets. So therefore, that theory of the Earth wobbling by itself is unsubstantiated theory at best. But there is, if we think about it, that means that the sun and the planets are also having some kind of motion that is equivalent to what we're seeing as a wobble. Well, if this all gets plotted out, like I've discovered in this template at Giza that these architects and designers left for humanity to find and understand and realize, that wobble, I believe, can be explained by the trajectory and movement of our sun. Our sun, if our sun is moving in a spiral path away from this nebula in Orion, I'm actually working on doing this in 3 dimensions to demonstrate, but I do believe that if we were to put that all in motion, just using software to show how this movement goes, we would be seeing a circular motion in our pole caused by the sun moving in not a circular motion, but a spiral, growing spiral, a Fibonacci spiral, away from the M42 Nebula.
Its trajectory point,
Right,
where it came
exactly.
from. And this is huge. This is as big as us realizing that the Earth was not the
Yes,
center,
yeah.
or that the Earth wasn't flat, that we revolved around the sun. It's huge. And more, what we are observing with other stars out there is that a star itself is the powerful drag for the planets which are following it. And if things are expanding and moving in the universe as they say that they are, this would make total sense. So instead of just imagining that the Earth rotates like all the planets do around a stationary sun, that sun is actually moving in space and all the planets are following it.
Right. This is very misleading in some of the earlier, it's starting to get a little better and they're starting to acknowledge these things, but we've always imagined how these things we're just floating here in space and things are going around in these circular motions around the sun. Well, this is complete, it's not.
It's limited thinking.
Right, absolutely. We are in a solar system around the sun, and the sun is moving on a spiral motion away from its birthing nebula. And there's great evidence that's come out from some different sources showing, literally taking pictures inside the nebula of Orion, showing multiple and different age stages as well, young to older, in spiral filaments birthing out of these nebula with several stars in them at different ages. And the other big thing about this too is the different stars that they were looking at was not only Orion and the nebula of Orion, because that is where we were birthed, the sun, but the planets, or the star system of the Pleiades and the star Sirius also were born out of that same nebula. that is exactly why we are kind of confounded of the movements of Sirius and the Pleiades, because they do not seem to move like the more distant stars. And that is the reason for that is they are also on spiral trajectories emanating from the same nebula that our sun came from. So this solves not only the precessional problem, it also solves the movements of Sirius and the Pleiades. It explains exactly why we see them moving like they are, which is a bit unusual. And that's why they were so obsessed on these particular stars, is that they were our brothers and our sisters' stars coming from that same nebula.
Well, it's quite fascinating when you look at your research and your presentation, which you so eloquently gave us last night. When you start to look at the Giza Plateau and you start to look at its alignments to other things beyond just the three stars of the belt of Orion, which is the smallest part of Orion. It's his waist, if you wanted to look at him as an archer or as a person or something, as the stick figures often draw. So you can do alignments from the three pyramids at Giza to those belt stars. But then as you start to make alignments to these other stars that you were speaking about, Regulus in Leo, and the Pleiades and Sirius, you found an unbelievable display of synchronistic data which lines up in a numerical pattern referencing not only Giza, but certain periods of time and certain dates. And you also found close relationships at periods of time where there seemed to probably have been in the ancient past major earth changes. Looking specifically at maybe 10, 11,000 BC at the end of this dip in the Younger Dryas, where we moved out of the ice ages into a warmer stage. You also found references to 3114 BC, which is a very critical point in the Mayan calendars. So let's talk a little bit about how you started to make those discoveries and realize the important overlap that you were discovering.
Yeah, it was quite profound, to say the least. But as I was looking at this star map, essentially, this is very easy, and everyone can do this. And in my book and on my website, I believe, in some different articles, I have the longitude and latitude precisely of the Sphinx. Or you can just go on Google Earth, and right between the paws of the Sphinx, use that as your point of reference to watch the skies. And when you do that, you want to be able to see the galactic plane. Click on that so you can view the galactic plane, the ecliptic, and you could also do the celestial equator too. So those are three of the main motions that we're looking at. So as I was doing that, and I was just essentially running the clock back and watching how things moved on the horizon and above over long periods of time, thousands of years, that relate to this great year. And what I was really amazed to find was that these dates that we are talking about of climatic change or disruptions seem to occur when there was very specific geometry or geometric alignments happening. When, for instance, when the galactic plane is exactly 90 degrees to our horizon, that is when the beginning of the Hebrew calendar began, and it gets much more involved and intricate than just that explanation, but this is really what they were pointing out, that like a half cycle, a great year is approximately 25,920 years. About half of that cycle ago was this major disruption with the end of the Ice Age, the Younger Dryas. And I've followed the work of Randall Carlson, just a brilliant man, good friend of mine now. I picked up on his work, and he studied the Younger Dryas and the end, and what really happened there as a geologist, from a geologist's point of view. And he's been working probably near 30 years at least on documenting this, what happened here. Mainstream academia was pretty much behind the story of a very slow, gradual melting of the ice caps and flooding associated with that. But I've been with Randall. We've traveled a good many miles together, and he's pointed out the clear evidence that this was a very abrupt change. And there's a lot of research, the Comet Research Group, among others, that are a lot of scientists getting behind this idea of an impact causing the end of
the
last ice age, or the Younger Dryas. There was actually a couple of events in there that spanned about 1,500 years or so, somewhere around there. But
and maybe that major impact was not just random,
right,
but could be predicted.
Yes.
Because literally, this is like a clock.
Right.
Looking at the stars and being able to control them with a computer program is sort of like being able to move the clock back and look at these potential alignments. So another body, large planetary body, possibly coming in close range, having satellites, maybe one of those satellites hit us or something. We certainly know that I'm sort of interjecting here, but
that's okay.
The asteroid belt that lies between Mars and Jupiter was obviously a planet at one point. If you look at the satellite pictures of Mars, one whole side of that planet is completely battered with debris, and the other side is completely smooth. So some impact hit Mars. Maybe that was the point when we also went through changes. It's very hard to know, but the evidence of impact is significant here on this planet.
Absolutely, and you know, we've discussed this many nights together, talking about what could be behind this, and what I really am coming to the conclusion. I think that there's different arguments for impacts. There's also discussion and quite good data that says there was the sun outburst could cause certain things. Well, I would propose that these things are all connected. And the one thing that would connect all of this in a logical way, that would align with the geometry, and it would explain both impact and sun coronal mass ejections, etc., excitement. And this is really quite simple. An electric dipole, if we're moving around and you've got both sides, you've got a positive and negative side on a circuit and you're going around, just think of a switch. If you turn a switch and all of a sudden you get close, bam, then you have a connection. You have an electrical connection there and your switch turns on.
And sometimes it's like an arc. It'll jump.
It'll jump, exactly. And
that's electromagnetism.
This is what's going on. There's an electrical factor here that the academic world does not seem to want to acknowledge. And I'm sorry, but you got to acknowledge this. This is part of what's going on here, this electrical connection. Let's just look at comets, for instance. Okay, we see these enormous tails coming off of these comets. Now, I don't want to be too hard on certain parts of academia here, but if you are trying to convince me that it's a fluffy snowball, icy snowball out there, you've failed miserably, because every comet that we've explored and landed on, there's been no water, there's been no ice. Matter of fact, some of the comets have been as black, the blackest black they've ever seen, okay? that's not what's going on here. It's not ice water fluffing off of the tail. No, the comet is actually breaking the solar capacitor. Just like a bug zapper in your backyard, when a bug flies into a certain proximity of this electrical charge, boom, the bug zapper zaps the bug because of this electrical connection. That's why these comets start to light up about this time they get inside the path
of the Earth's atmosphere, or they
actually
or near it.
of Jupiter. When they come in the solar system, they start lighting up. That's about the time where they start breaking this solar capacitor. And this tail, and sometimes the tail. Do you remember there was a few years ago? I don't recall the name of the comet.
There was Halley's not too long ago.
Yeah, this one was the one that passed near Mars. And it actually interacted with Mars, where the coma from the comet was so large, they actually measured it as larger than the sun. Okay? You don't have enough water on a little bitty comet to make a tail that's visible bigger than the sun. These ideas have got to be put to rest. These are electrical conditions that are going on with these comets. Now, if we are moving in relative position to the galactic plane in the galaxy, and it's a dipole where we have a positive on the top and a negative on the bottom, and there's a connection there. As we're moving through those, we hit these every 180 degrees or so that we go around. We are going through one of these alignments. And as we near these alignments, that's when this Barnards Loop is this electrical ionized plasma trail that we can see. And I think that when we get to those regions where these electrical connections occur, that's when we have, and that would associate the sun disruption from the electrical change there. It would also have mass in it because these comets, and when these electrical connections happen, it pulls in debris. That it actually is pulling in debris toward the comet and water in toward the comet. So also this explains flooding as well. If we look at the tails of these comets, a lot of it is water in these comet tails. And if you can measure the width of these tails, and we could see if we were to go through this tail, how long we would have torrential rain. For instance, hail bop. If we would have been, I think it was like 6 months, a little further along our path as the Earth goes around the sun, and we would have ran through the tail of Comet Hail Bop, it would have rained solid torrential rain for more than a month. Just deluge of water as we were going through this. It would take about 30 days for the Earth to actually pass through this tail, that was left behind by Comet Hail Bop. And that's only a small, well, it was a fairly large comet, right, but not as big as some of the ancient ones that have been written in some obscure texts that people don't like us to read.
Well, there's a reason why ancient culture had, omens predicted, yes, around the appearance of comets, right, and what they called the appearance of special stars. Mm-hmm. And the whole birth of Jesus is associated, yes, with a new star, yes, in the sky. Indian traditions talk about the blue star, often referred to as the Kachina, mm-hmm, coming. It's a special blue star, and when it comes, there's going to be massive change that, mm-hmm, will happen. Weather changes, right, and, thunderbolts and all sorts of things. Right. For anyone new to this topic, I would highly encourage them to look at the work of Anthony Peratt, who is a plasma physicist and worked at Lawrence Livermore Labs for many years. And he's written a book. I forgot the name of the book, but the book goes into great detail about the petroglyphs that are drawn on rocks all over the globe.
Right.
And these petroglyphs actually are visual representations of certain states of this electrical charge which you're speaking of. He refers to it as synchrotronic light, which is a plasma discharge light that would occur in the atmosphere, showing different graphic representations. And this would be certain stages of instability that our sun could go through. Now, he sees these in a lab when he works with plasmas, and he gets instability inside chambers, and he sees these graphic representations of little stick men with their arms up and their feet down and little circular balls out to the side. Sometimes it looks like a fish with vertebrae in it. Sometimes it looks like a bird with a bird head popping off. And these are graphic representations in petroglyphs that we find from New Zealand, Australia, to Alaska, to Japan and Korea, and throughout Central Europe. I mean, literally South America, all over the globe we can find these, even in Easter Island. So there's a lot of recent interest now in this potential historical record being left of plasma discharge happening on this earth and being recorded in these petroglyphs all over the world. Because how would people have the inspiration or the motivation to carve these petroglyphs onto rocks? I mean, even the pictures of beings that look like they have these huge, spikes coming out of their head, or suns, or beings with these long hair filaments coming out. These are all certain discharges and certain wave frequencies of synchrotronic light.
Yes, and these pictographs are very accurate. If you were to have someone draw what they saw, and you had to do the same thing, you would come up with just what those ancient people were writing on these petroglyphs. And not only that, you combine the accuracy of what we're looking at with the stories associated with that. I mean, how can we really write this off as just drawings of ancient people who were just drawing for the sake of drawing? No, these people were documenting what they were seeing, and a lot of it was associated with these changes. And
so if anyone wants to look more of that information up, go to Anthony Peratt's work, or Googled, I would say, the Thunderbolts project. You'll find a lot of information there about many scientists now who work in industry with plasmas, and they are beginning to recognize Anthony's work and other people's work, like Donald Scott, and there's a couple of other people, I'm trying to remember all of their names, Walt Thornhill, and one of the early people who had some of these ideas was Immanuel Velikovsky. He was a Russian writer who wrote a book called Worlds in Collision. He was one of the first people in the 40s and late 30s and into the early 40s who began to start to make these connections about an electrical nature to the galaxy. And this is quite exciting to me, just to sort of interject into the UFO world. If we begin to understand that dark matter and dark energy is really just a matter of certain stages of electrical current in the greater galaxy, once we learn how to work with that current, or literally float on that current, or use that current like an electrical charge or electrical power source, we will be able to travel from one place to another with incredible source of fuel or power. We won't need to take the fuel with us. And it is, as many of these scientists I have spoken to, like an ocean. As we can float on our ocean in boats, once we learned how to build and engineer boats that could hold out the water and float on it, we will also learn how to float on this current. And there may be species who began many, many millions of years before us, who mastered and learned that technology, and at some point traveled to our Earth, maybe started civilization here, maybe built these particular monuments that we're referring to all over the globe. Giza is one of probably over 1,000 ancient sites you can go and look at and map out and find very similar alignments. I wouldn't be surprised if someone went to Angkor Wat and did the same type of research you did, or went down to Tiahuanaco or Teotihuacan and looked at the Mayan cultures and the Aztec cultures. We would probably find all these same alignments as you have found in Giza.
Yeah, I've already
started to do that.
I couldn't help myself, just there's such an abundance of sites, and I've checked out most of the major ones, just basically going in, and right off the bat, there's major Angkor Wat. There's 432 sphinxes that line the causeway that goes to it. Now, the number 432 is a key number in this whole template design and stuff. But yeah, it's all over, and it's quite profound.
Another resource I would like to refer people to is I want you to mention your website so that people are able to go and find these connections.
Yeah, my website is thegizatemplate.com, and you can access my book through that. And there's I have some connections to some articles I've written. There's some podcasts I've done, and different information there. But I'm working on a couple of new books actually, and I've got so much to do and no time to do it. And I'm just trying to find that time to be able to really focus on this research and bring it to the attention of people who want to hear this.
Well, your co-author, who wasn't actually a co-author, but he helped a little bit
Laird
in the research,
Scranton,
is
my
Laird,
good friend
Laird
Laird,
Scranton.
yes.
Laird has
Brilliant
also been
man.
a guest here. We also have a show at you can visit mainlinemufon.com on our video page and see an interview that we did here with Laird. He is an amazing researcher as well, and really his work overlaps beautifully with yours.
Yes, it's
He's
really
a great inspiration.
Yeah.
And also looking at the work of Robert Schoch. He has done a lot of research on several ancient sites. He started with Giza, and he's also recently done a lot of work at Göbekli Tepe, which is a fascinating, relatively new discovery, and that it's only really, I think, around 1997 that it started to be excavated in depth by a German geologist named Klaus Schmidt. Now, Klaus has unfortunately since passed away, and I don't know the state of the ongoing research or who is directing that research, but Göbekli Tepe is a site that goes back to this end of the Younger Dryas, as we were referring to before, and it is a Stonehenge type structure that seems to be deliberately buried at a point of about 10,000 years ago, or maybe a little later. Maybe these sites were buried deliberately around 8,000 or 9,000 years ago. It's not quite certain. But Göbekli Tepe is, the more you dig, the more you find. Like at Giza, it's not only one series of standing stones that's Stonehenge-like, in that there are larger stones in the middle and then smaller stones on the outside that all seem to be standing upright, but the ones at Göbekli are kind of more individually balanced, and they're more intricately carved. This, of course, Stonehenge doesn't seem to have carved stones. But the dating of this work and the alignment that Robert Schoch's work did completely confirms and aligns many of the same things that is brought out in your work. So I would love to see a conference at some point where we have you and Robert Schoch and Laird Scranton, all come together, and maybe some of the Electric Universe people come together and really share this information in depth, because when you start to see the overlays, and you've taken 20 years of your life now,
21.
focused on this work.
Yeah.
And when you look at Laird spent probably 25, 30 years of his life studying some specific ancient sites, specifically with language and ancient culture and how certain structures have these similarities around the globe. It's, the more you dig, the more you find when you start to delve into these things.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yes, and actually, speaking about Laird, and Laird and I have both been talking about this for years, that we feel that we're on the precipice of really cracking this case of these conditions and how they're brought about and what all these ancient monuments were constructed for. Obviously, they put a lot of time and effort into constructing these. It had to be of utmost importance. But we're talking about getting people, just like you said, together. So much of this, I suppose I got to be a little careful here, but there are some researchers that like to hold things close to the vest to keep it as theirs and protect their own work, and I completely understand that. But there's also a point where it almost becomes detrimental to the one who's not sharing with others, because if we all come together and put our research on this table right here, half a dozen of us, we could concur, and by doing that, we'd be able to weed out maybe imperfections in certain things and really come closer to the answers here. And I really would plead to other researchers, and I'm actually a little disappointed, I got to say, that the book I've put together, jokingly here, that they say that for every mathematical equation you lose 10,000 sales. So if that's the case, I'm deep in the hole before I've even started. But with that being said, my research is based on mathematics and geometry and can all be
reproduced or proved.
And proved. And when I hear these other researchers that are speaking and they're saying, oh, they don't know why Giza was constructed, I really want to stand up and say, well, wait a minute here. You have not read all the data yet. Because in my book, and I still would love debate, and I would love people to come and debate me on this and try to check my work, check my homework, But there is an answer to Giza. The mystery isn't quite as deep as it was. They left it there for us to understand. It was made to be decoded and understood by people with certain, actually simple ability. I am not a mathematical genius by any stretch of the means. I'm just a simple guy who was able to take the time and understand this. They left clues for each step along the way to develop this whole plan. So to the other researchers, I say, please read my book, and anyone else interested, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I have some answers to these questions, and I'd love to share it.
I think you have some answers too, Ed, and it's been such an honor and such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Getting to know you,
Thank you.
Reading your work, hearing your presentation a few times now, and I'm just very honored that I was able to share it with this mainline community. So if you've joined us halfway through this program, my guest has been Edward Nightingale, and the name of his book is called The Giza Template. The name of his website is
The Giza Template.
Also The Giza Template, and you can find more information there. If you'd like to know a little more about the hosting organization, myself, I'm Jennifer Stein, and I have Mainline MUFON. So you've been watching a program here at Radnor Studio 21 called Mainline MUFON. You can Google Mainline MUFON and see about our free programs at the Tredyffrin Public Library on a monthly basis, and watch for more interesting programs here at Radnor Studio 21. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us, Ed.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for having me.